mode.
Hey everybody, welcome to March edition of 3TC. We're glad to have you with us. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I hope you're wearing green or orange if you're a Protestant Irish person. Both are acceptable. I'm Danica Olson, and I'm the host. If you haven't joined us before, we're glad to have you with us. Today we have Pastor Keith Anderson with us, and he'll be talking about social media and all things digital church. So welcome, Keith.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Just if you haven't joined us before, just a note that you can join the conversation by typing your questions into the box on the right-hand side of your screen. And we'll pick those up a little later, and so you can join in the conversation. As we get started, wondering if maybe, Keith, you could tell us a little bit about who you are and your background, what you like to do for fun, whatever you'd like to tell us before we jump into social media and ministry.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Let's see. Well, I've been a parish pastor for 12 years, and I serve two different churches, one in New England, just outside of Boston, and my current church just outside of Philadelphia, Upper Dublin Lutheran Church. And I'm originally from Maryland. I have 4 kids, 11, 9, and 6-year-old twins, and a golden retriever.
Awesome. And a partridge and a pear tree.
That's right. We've got it all. And my wife and I actually met in divinity school. She was doing sort of an academic track, and I was doing ministry track. So it's a kind of part of who we are and what we do.
Awesome. That's so good. Well, like I said to you before, we're just hanging out. I hope you've grabbed your coffee or whatever your beverage of choice is right now. Maybe it's St. Patrick's Day. Maybe you're having a beer. If only, right? Well, let's just talk about your latest project to start with.
Sure.
The name of your new book is, remind me again?
The Digital Cathedral, Networked Ministry in a Wireless World.
Okay, I couldn't remember the second part, so I didn't want to figure to let you take that one. So in this new book, you talk about being in cathedral. And I'm wondering if you can unpack that phrase, in cathedral, for us, where it comes from and what it means for us.
Sure. Yeah, it's a kind of an odd choice, being a Lutheran and having chosen the cathedral as a central image, since we don't really have cathedrals. But the cathedral for me became this way of thinking about church in a more expansive and broad way, because the statistics all show there are fewer people who are affiliating with denominations or attending church altogether. And so my question is then, how can we be church where people are, and how can we see the ways that people live out their lives and make meaning and pursue religion, spirituality, and faith in their daily lives as something meaningful, important, and sacred. And so this expansive idea of cathedral, is that it can hold lots and lots of different people. So anytime you walk into a cathedral, there are religiously devout people who are only there for the history or the architecture. So there are people there for all kinds of different reasons, different walks of life, different belief systems. But cathedrals are also really networked hubs in their local communities. So they're very much connected to the neighborhoods, the cities, the regions to which they're a part, and really globally in terms of drawing pilgrims from all over the world. So this summer I went to St. John the Divine, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York, which is the 3rd largest church in all of Christendom. And there I did the tours, I did the noontime Eucharist, and what was really interesting, I also toured the neighborhood too. And even in the tours, was the tour guides were taking us around and showing us different things in the cathedral. So many of the stories they told connected outside of the cathedral to the neighborhood and to the city. So we heard about how the cathedral is connected to Morningside Heights, the neighborhood it's in, how they're so deeply connected together, and the ways in which the city itself and the cathedral are so intertwined. So, big question for me then is, how can we see our congregations or our ministry centers as deeply connected to the neighborhoods locally, like coffee shop ministry, theology pubs, and digitally in digital gathering spaces like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and others.
Cool. Have you, I mean, obviously in your book you sort of unpack that. Do you have ways that some churches are doing really great at that, or other ways that people are sucking at that as far as being actually connected within their neighborhood? I know that for many, we've talked for quite a while that churches used to be the hub of the neighborhood, the social center, the gathering place, the where people's needs were met, both physical and spiritual. And now people choose church not based on or on location, but based on the shopping mall that that you can pick and choose what fits for you and things like that. Can you say anything about that? About the location is not necessarily the reason people pick places?
Sure. Well, I mean, the internet and our mobile devices have upended the way that we think about the way we choose lots of things, the way we shop, the way we listen to music, the way we watch TV. So a lot of it so much is on demand now. Like you binge watch Netflix, you can watch 3 seasons in 3 weeks as opposed to tuning in once a week every day during rating season. And so we've gone from used to be in the coal era, right? The church you went to was the church you could walk to or ride a horse to. So it was all very locally based. And then we got in our cars and we could pick and choose. And now we do that digitally in some ways, where people check out our social media platforms and our websites long before they walk into our churches to decide whether they want to even try on a Sunday morning. So, the Sunday morning visit is not the first time people are engaged with our congregations. They're very much engaged digitally and hopefully locally if we're out there. I mean, there are churches that are doing that really well in their local communities. I mean, in a time when churches are struggling, denominations are struggling, I mean, there are 2 instincts, right? One is to just circle the wagons, hold up inside of our church buildings and hope it all blows over. And maintain what we have and what we're comfortable with and what we know. And then the other instinct is to say, we're in this new time, not of our making or of our choosing, but we have to figure out a way to be the church now. And a lot of that movement is into these local spaces where people are either doing theology pubs or in coffee shops or at farmers markets. Lots of different creative, kind of contextually, kind of appropriate places that people are trying to find ways to connect with people and be the church in a broader way.
Great, that's cool. It's a question I came across or was told just this week that there's a church in our city that doesn't even have a website. And I'm like, okay, that tells people something. That we're into or just about the people who are already here. So very interesting. You keep talking about this Theology Pub thing, and and I love it. It's great for young adults and adults, but what are the beerless options for youth? Some kind of environments where you've seen that those kinds of conversations can happen without them being surrounded by alcohol. Yeah.
One of my favorite interviews that I had in writing the book was with a friend of mine, Haley Bay Beeman, who's a pastor for children, youth, and family ministry at Zion Lutheran in York, Pennsylvania. And she does this great coffee shop ministry with her youth called Fill My Cup. And she said, the kind of youth were looking for kind of wanted a different kind of format and setting, so they moved from the youth room to the local Starbucks, where they do like a 2-hour gathering that's checking in and Bible study. So very intentional about what they're up to, but it's a very public way of being church. So she says, people over here and listen in when we're talking about the Bible or when we're praying together. She said, the baristas, the staff at Starbucks now know that, to expect us, and when we come, they help set up and bring chairs over. She said they'll even put crosses in the foam on the lattes, as a sort of an acknowledgement, an affirmation of like, there's this connection here, and they're glad they're there.
Cool.
And Haley has sort of become, in a way, a pastor not only to her youth, but sort of, to the people of the staff that's there too. So when we're in these public places consistently, We develop relationships not only with people that that participate in that conversation, but also with the people who overhear, the staff, and the local community. And I just want to say, I think one of the things Haley does with that that's really great, is that she helps to subsidize the cost, because if you go to Starbucks you could spend $4 or $5 and that could be prohibitive. So she just asked the kids to pitch in $2 each, and then she covers the rest, which I think is really great.
Cool. That is great. So you have an audience. Oh, actually, I wanted to interject this really quick. We've got some people live tweeting this conversation, and so if people listening in want to continue or jump in on the live tweet deal, the hashtag is 3TC. So join in the conversation there as well. But if you want to ask a question here, ask it here, because I can't do all of those things at the same time. I like to multitask, but when I'm on, that's difficult. So jumping back in, this audience is a network of CYF people, some in traditional church settings, camp settings, college campuses. Some people are volunteers, all that kind of stuff. How do you see this group of people impacted and transformed by the networked cathedral view of ministry?
Yeah. Well, I think in so many ways, I mean, just the fact that you think of yourselves as a network is really living into the new reality that we are in. Yes, studies show we're moving away from institutions and groups and more toward networks of our own making, our own shaping. And so thinking of yourselves in that way is a great model for the rest of the church. Now clergy support groups are not just your local clergy gathering conference group. It's people that are spread across Facebook and Twitter, your own denomination, and others. So we really are living into already, whether we name it that or not, this sort of networked kind of reality that we're in. And I think that's even more accelerated when you're talking about doing ministry with college students, with youth, teenagers, people for whom these digital devices and this digital reality is like breathing. It's just part of who they are. But yet sometimes I'm surprised because I'm not a digital native. I'm a solid Gen Xer here, and so I'm sort of like a bridge generation. I kind of trying to map for those who are not native to what's going on. It still is really important to think through, even with digital natives, how do we think about what this means theologically, spiritually, because when you've grown up with this technology and you take it for granted, sometimes you don't stop to ask those reflective questions. And I think that's a really important thing to continue to do. Sometimes people say, well, they know the technology. Yeah, but how do we reflect on that, the use of that technology, the faithful use of that technology?
Can you say, you just said something that piqued my interest about what does it mean theologically and culturally? Have you sort of formed those kinds of statements, or is this a work in progress?
Well, whoever readers of the book will determine whether it's still a work in progress or I got it. But what I think is I think the networks that we're a part of are going to help us live into how we're going to be the church, because I think church is going to be a more networked experience. And I mean, there's a lot of and stuff in the Bible about being the body of Christ. That's a very kind of networked way of being like the body, the different parts of the body, like different nodes in the network. But for me, theologically, the heart of it is a Lutheran sense understanding of vocation, that each of us in our daily lives are living out our ministry. And sometimes we discount the things that are happening on social media as being like really mundane, like pictures of pets and pictures of food and so on. But those are part of people's daily lives, and those are a big part of the way that they make meaning and express that meaning and their spirituality and their faith. So for me, if I'm able to affirm the ordinary, very mundane things in people's lives, kind of day in, day out, challenges and joys, and I can be present to that and affirm that, that's for me, a very pastoral thing to be doing. And now I get to do it with a whole range of people who never step foot in a church, who are sometimes good friends of mine, or people in the local community. So I get to do that on a much broader scale.
Awesome. I'm just wondering if there was something, an aha moment or something that, oh, I don't know if it was an isolated event or not, but that turned you on to the digitally integrated exploration of the church.
Really came out of my own parish ministry. We had a council retreat, and one of our goals was improving communications. And basically, we just sort of looked around and said, well, what's available to us? And like Facebook was out, and Twitter was still fairly new. I'd been blogging my sermons, and people thought, that was a valuable thing to put sermons online. And so we just kind of pushed out and started experimenting. And this was 2008, so this is a while ago now. But but the kind of aha moment is like, wow, look at how we are connected more deeply to each other's lives. Look how much more of each other's lives we see than we used to. And look at how many conversations at church start with, oh, I saw on Facebook that, as a way of into engaging each other face-to-face, coming off of these digital platforms. So for me, I guess the kind of ongoing aha moment is, I always feel like if we could get more people engaged in these digital spaces, they're sort of like training for how we need to be the church now. So this networked way of being connected and listening and engaging with people, that's really a model for ministry in our face-to-face ministry, in the 21st century. So if you can show up on Facebook enough, you sort of figure out the rhythms of it. And I think that informs the way that you do your face-to-face ministry too, and I think that's what we really need. So I guess, I've sort of discovered along the way I love thinking about and using technology, but technology for me is primarily a way of describing the way that the church is changing and the way that ministry needs to change.
Cool. That's great. Could you come in and talk to my staff? Well, we've got some questions coming in, and I'm sure there'll be more as we get going here, but let's just get started with those. How about that?
Okay.
This first question comes from Dan, and Dan was an overachiever and had this question before we even went live. So go, Dan. He says, it seems like some church leaders are concerned about authenticity and social media. If we're going to embrace this tool for ministry, shouldn't we be as authentic in digital space as we are in real life?
Yes, and that's a huge question. Somebody just posted a question on my Facebook wall today asking that question. And
was his name Dan?
No, his name was Jay Gamlin. There was this big authenticity question right on my Facebook page. And I sort of go back to a quote from Peter Rollins, who talks about how, it's not just our Facebook profile that is like this facade to the world. We also have this facade in our face-to-face lives, where we say, I'm fine, everything's good, I'm busy, but it's a good busy, We put up this front, period, in our lives, and that gets extended out into digital spaces. So part of the question is, how are we to be authentic in our face-to-face lives as well? For me, authenticity is about being consistently present and consistently yourself across local and digital and church platforms, and to really think about with a great sense of humility, that I'm part of this huge expansive network. I think you get into trouble when you think, oh, I'm the next social media church rock star, and like how many people are following me and liking what I put down, and it's like, well, you're just a small node in the network. So how can we, like with that sense of calling, you might call it, fulfill that part we play in the network in a very faithful but yet humble way? So I think humility is a big part of the kind of presence we want to bring to bear in these spaces.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so interesting because it's a conversation that I navigate with my young people quite regularly, because they are so concerned about how many followers, how many likes, those kinds of things. They're so wrapped up into the imaging piece of it. Like, for instance, I challenged them to do the Lenten Instagram a day, and they were like, Danica, nobody, you're not supposed to post on Instagram more than once a week. Like that is a faux pas on Instagram. And they're like really serious about that their identity is wrapped up in how often and they're not on Facebook. They are, that's old news. That's for old people.
Yep.
But for them, Instagram and Twitter, you only post things on Twitter that are hilarious, and you only post things on Instagram that are artsy or beautiful, or, it's all about the image piece for them. So, do you have tips about navigating that conversation, the humility conversation with kids? I think.
Well, so much of it is about, constructing one's identity, right? Like, and when you're a teenager, I have a daughter that's just started middle school this year, so we're getting there, and the formation of identity has so much to do with the friends that you're connected to face-to-face and digitally, and so your identity is shaped by those affirmations, or negative or positive feedback. But there's a line between identity formation and finding your entire self-worth in the number of likes that you receive or the number of comments that you receive. And when we're and I think it could go for adults too in some cases, when we're locating our value and our worth in those things, then we're getting into trouble.
Yeah, it's a fine line for them, because I think you're right. They don't necessarily separate the real versus the perceived. So, and you're right. I think some adults fall into that too. All right, we got some questions, so we'll keep going. This one, Jason is very scholarly and put a Kierkegaard quote in his question. So.
Oh my.
Nay, to press the busyness into which one steadily enters further and further, and the noise which the truth continually slips more and more into oblivion, and the mass of connections, stimuli, and hindrances, these make it ever more impossible for one to win any deeper knowledge of himself. End quote. Can technology help young people learn more about themselves, or is it the absence of these things that they learn more about who God has created them to be? Love that.
Great quote, great question. I think there's a combination of the two. This networked reality that we're a part of is our reality. And so as nice as it would be to say, oh, we're just going to unplug and disconnect now, and we can do that for stretches of time, but seemingly shorter stretches of time. That, how do we work within that? How do we work within that space? So agreed that we need time apart, and how do you help kids have a sense of Sabbath into their, that's so hard for all of us, but how do we bring a sense of Sabbath into our everyday lives, but also into our digital lives? How do we step away from the screen? Just had a friend who was talking about, having to take the phone away from her daughter for something or other, and, it's like hard to not go to something and not have your phone with you to take pictures and be tagged and all of those things. So how do we cultivate a sense of Sabbath in all areas of our lives, including the digital ones?
It's a question that wasn't even a question. Even in like 2008, when you were saying, Twitter was hardly around, and Facebook was still a very huge phenomena, and just in that short amount of time, how
what the big accelerator is smartphones, because back in the day you'd have to go to your desktop computer in your home office or something and log in, and now you're constantly part of that conversation. So it's there's authors call it the triple revolution of social media, internet, and mobile technology, and it's the combination of those three that have really, in the last 5 years, powerfully, or 7 years, I guess, really powerfully shaped the way that we live our everyday lives.
Good. Good. All right, another question from Dan. How do we get folks to actively engage in social media rather than passively consume it?
Good question. If we're talking about parishioners, I mean, we try to encourage people when they come to church to check in, and we just have a hashtag for church, UDLC. And we encourage people to do that, probably not as much as we should. But I think a part of it is that we have to remember this is about relationships and creating and cultivating and strengthening relationships. So sometimes we get so focused on the content that we're sharing, whether it's a sermon podcast or posting the prayers of the church, all things that we do. But sometimes we can just treat the content as an end of itself as opposed to the content as a place where Bethany Stoley, who I know you've had on before, talks about the content as the place, as sort of a campfire, kind of a place around which people can gather and be in community and in relationship. So we kind of lose the social part of social media. We lose track of that sometimes because we're so accustomed to kind of being in this broadcast mentality where we have a message and we're going to push it out in all these different channels.
Yeah, so interesting. Just as a reminder to people listening in, we just have a couple more minutes, so if this is your last chance to get your question in. Another question from our friend Dan, all the way back to the Theology Pub thing. Is it more about the way we approach the conversation than just the location?
Oh yeah, I talk a lot about that, probably a couple chapters worth on in my book on that, and that's part of the humility part where we've shifted in faith formation to the sense of, here's the expert and I'm the expert, whether it's a pastor, a professor, or a teacher, and I'm going to impart to you this information. And the setting in the Theology Pubs is more conversational. So I sort of introduce the topic, but then I get out of the way and I let people share because people are experts in their own lives. And I kind of hold the space for people to reflect together and learn from each other on that. And I think the setting puts people at ease. So I have the same people at church, and some of the same people that are at church come to Theology Pub, and the way they talk about God in their lives is very different. Because when we're in church spaces, we sometimes think we have to talk in churchy or kind of churchy ways.
Yep, absolutely.
And there's research about this. And then when you get into these other spaces, people talk in ways that are more relaxed and a little more kind of story-oriented and a little more real. And that kind of creates an opening for us to reflect on the way God is at work in our lives or in the world in a different dimension, a different way.
Cool.
Yeah.
Raymond has a great question. How do parents, youth directors, pastors, and others teach youth to use social media to be active in worship rather than a way to disengage?
Yeah, that's a great question. What are the ways in which we can invite them to participate, in worship through their phones? Sometimes people will, like at church one time, we asked people to text their questions, and we displayed them up on the screens while my sermon was going on, kind of talking about the questions we think but don't say in church. So whether they use a hashtag, and maybe you have somebody, during the service that's sort of your digital pastor person who's kind of monitoring that conversation, whether, whichever platforms you choose to engage with people. Some churches are moving to that where they have sort of a ministry person that's designated as kind of the digital pastor person during worship. So if people are tweeting, if people are expressing prayer concerns or responding to the sermon, that person could engage with them in the digital space. So that's an interesting move some congregations are making.
Awesome. I think the other teaching, or the other piece of learning, is about teaching people who are not digital natives to see, when they see kids or young adults on their phone, that they may actually be engaging. They may be live tweeting the service, or they may be the sermon, or whatever the case may be. That, at least, I'm sure we're the only congregation that this happens. But that, the older people, sorry to generation stereotype, but say, the kids are being so disrespectful. They're all on their phones,
Mm-hmm.
you know, during worship or during this or that. So the education piece goes both ways, I think.
Right, like you know, they're who are they connecting with? What are they connecting around? I mean, when we go on Appalachia Service Project, the kids are on their phone all the time, and what you see on Instagram is they're telling the story of this service
Yeah,
project.
totally.
And that's a hugely powerful story. You know, or in the vans driving back, and they're Snapchatting each other from van to van. You know,
Yeah.
and so they're connected to each other, even though we're 8 hours, you know, in this caravan of vans heading home. So it's about telling the story, and it's about connecting, and it's about tuning in rather than tuning out.
Awesome. Well, I want to be mindful of our time. I was hoping that Terry would clarify her question, but maybe she can connect with you on one of these Connect with Keith section or places that we've got on the side of the screen here. So just as an invitation, yes, you'd love for people to continue the conversation with you and talk more about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Any of these platforms, I'd be glad to answer other questions and connect more and be connected going forward. Great.
Cool. If you haven't checked it out, there's actually a very live tweet or Twitter feed, excuse me, for today's hashtag 3TC. So if you haven't been following along with that, you can see what other people are thinking about the same conversation and join in there as well. Thank you so much, Keith, for being with us today. Just a couple of housekeeping things as we go. Don't forget to take the salary survey if you haven't done so already. Super important information for congregations as they hire or give you raises. Great to have an expansive database of that information. So check that out. All the videos are up and posted on the Extravaganza website. On the website. Now I've got hashtags in my head. elcaymnet.org/evideos, not hashtag evideos. So you can check out those. And also all of our Third Tuesday conversations are archived on the website as well. It's a new website. You'll want to check it out. So thanks again, Keith, for being with us. We're glad to have you.
Thanks.
And, we'll look forward to hearing more from you in the future. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.